All right, so this week we talked about we're looking at this article Pygmalion and the anime girl, I think is the title of it. Um it's a very long and rambling journey, kind of poetic, uh offensive in its not getting straight to the point to at least one of our crew, Eric, who's not here to share his critiques. But to me, it was uh, it just hit. It hit very powerfully and convinced me of some things and helped me see a part of the overall puzzle that I didn't have completely filled in. And maybe that's why I liked it, is because it shares almost all of my priors, and so as I'm going through, it might seem rambling if you don't share a lot of those priors. But to me, I shared those priors already. And then there were a couple things overlaid on the top of it that just provided more detail. And I'll just be real specific about that before handing it on. What I really like the most is talking about what's going on as a cascade failure, and that if you really want to understand it, like there's kind of a mathematical relationship to what's going on. And I'd kind of had been beyond reason but not beyond hope for uh for the system, for political solutions. And I still feel like there's political work to be done in order to stave off the worst possible outcomes. But I'm no longer convinced that some sort of complete collapse and restructuring can be avoided at some level just because of the central thesis, which was to me that what happened that made America and all of the West really successful was this you know deracinated individualism where people were able to score well on placement tests and get placed in this plug and play, vast, interconnected global economy, where they'd move from communities from here to there, being separated from um, all of the nurturing fundamental social technology that led that person to being a competent and capable individual in the first place, uh, in this kind of army of uh, technocrats and highly competent individuals, from the dawn of the system and the uh, advancement of it in the post World War II era, produced this vast amount of wealth and this incredibly complex society that, in order to be maintained, requires that high degree of competence. And we've talked in previous episodes about the competence crisis and what we're facing with that. And some of it's attributed to, the push for diversity over merit. But what this woke me up to is maybe the collapse of competency has something more to do with deteriorating social technology, namely families, tightly interconnected families and communities that are able to produce the kind of individuals that have the competence to run this stuff. And now it's kind of, we're in this situation where we have this moth-eaten core that can't reproduce the quantity of competent individuals necessary to keep this complex system going. And not only that, but the solution, which is, marriage, family, community. Billionaire Psycho went and looked at everything across the board in order to really persuasively argue that we can't get back there with the way things are, with dating technology, and everything's Tinder, because of diversity, equity, inclusion, and litigation over sexual harassment, et cetera, in the workplace. People can't approach people to meet people in person. And that's become socially weird and awkward. So people can't do it. So how are people going to form families in this environment? And the idea that marriage has become this luxury good that most people just simply can't afford. And then even then, raising children, you're dependent on the state and public school, which has been captured by Marxists. So how are you going to have a family? For people in my generation, in their mid 30s, we remember how we met our spouses and reflexively assumed that other people could do the same that we did, just like boomers maybe assumed, oh, well, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and work hard like we did. You millennials are lazy, and that's the problem. It's like, no, the world's changed. The cost of living relative to income has exploded. And those jobs that boomers had, because we had an industrialized economy in America specifically, those jobs are all gone. So, we can't flip a switch and do the things that are necessary to reestablish that foundation. And since we can't do that and it's off the table, there's really no way to keep the current system going as it is, without some form of long, painful, protracted collapse and
Mhm.
restructuring.
Yeah, maybe because I like what you said, and Grannon, I think it's you gave a little a bit of a perspective from more like on a societal level, right? And similarly to what he does in the article. But I also think, or I read the article more as a kind of individual outcry sort of thing, and I found it really interesting just to get the perspective of a presumably young man, right? And what he's faced and what they are faced in today's society, right? Because for me too, I'm in my 40s, and I'm a different generation, and it's not always easy to really grasp what these guys are up to, right? Because it's just such a changed world, and he begins the article, kind of like making fun of the mainstream conservative message, basically, or not making fun, just pointing out that it doesn't work, right? Uh, so if basically these people tell you, okay, get married, like be virtuous and blah blah blah, and be a good conservative, and that's the solution. But it's a solution that worked in the past, right? It's just not that world anymore, and it's just not so easy anymore on so many levels. And I kind of feel for those young guys, right? I mean, they kind of, my impression is they kind of seek guidance, right, in this whole morass, and there's just many conflicting messages, and that's what I kind of read in that article too, right? I mean, there's the guys basically say be a good conservative, right? And then there are like guys saying, okay, you got to hustle hard, be an entrepreneur, get rich, that sort of thing. Or then there's this school like forget about all morals, become a Nietzschean Übermensch and just screw everything, and be like the wild guy, and there's all these things, right? And it's what I liked about this article is that it didn't like it just listed many of those things, right? Those solutions that are on offer, like the sort of guidance that is available, and also listed all the problems, especially young men face in this society. And it is a sort of a rambling, meandering article, but I actually did like that he didn't come up with a solution, or he didn't say, okay, that's how young men should be or should counter the problem. I think he's just too. My impression was he's too wise, for that sort of thing, and that's kind of impressive, I think, because with life experience, actually, you do kind of learn that these things are not so easy to defined, and there's not like no way of life that you can prescribe, you know, that to others, you know, because everybody has to find his own way to a degree. And it's refreshing, you know, to see someone reflecting very deeply about the problems, describing for us, you know, like what these actually are, you know, in this crazy technology, like driven, like absolutely bonkers world that these young people, you know, just live in now, while also, reflecting a little deeper about what might be done, what might not be done. And at the end, you think, this article, it kind of brings you a step further, but is there a solution? Is there something that we can prescribe? I don't think so. I'm not sure, you know, like the hustle hard mindset, you know, will get you very far, or the become a Nietzschean Übermensch, you know, or the become like a good Christian and just you know, go back to the 1950s kind of thing. So yeah, in that sense, even, you know, sometimes it's not so much about what do I agree with, what do I not agree with, right? It's just to get a glimpse of what these people are up to, and just make you think about it, right? So that's why I liked it.
The thing was good for you know, we were discussing before we started recording, you know, it's like the journey it went on, and John Carter's not on this conversation, it likened it to a poem, which I thought, you know, was good because the process of reading it was enjoyable to me. So it does kind of go, it's not a concise essay that just hits the bullet points, you know, but some of that would be hard to do in an essay format where you try to just be concise and hit the bullet points, because there's all these threads. It's kind of like you're describing what's wrong with like a theory of everything and why everything's gone to, or seems to be going to shit, you know, and trying to tie that together in a neat and concise way. And a lot of this stuff, I mean, it's hard to see on a macro level, you know, because there's so many components to it. But on an individual level, you know, which is, I guess, kind of the way he seems to approach it, is, you know, through the eyes of like a young man today, you know, like thinking about this as a parent, some, you know, tail end of Generation X, so I'm not going through this stuff myself so much, but thinking, you know, I got a son who's 11, like, how do I advise him about these life issues and, you know, prepare him for things? Because, you know, the days, you hear the stories from the World War II generation of, you know, people that met, you know, and a whirlwind romance, and then they got married, and then they had their, you know, this long marriage until they died of old age, and their kids grew up, and, you know, they got to see their kids doing well, their grandkids doing well, and all that. And it's like, and it didn't seem like it was such an uphill battle in the sense of, not to say they didn't sacrifice or work hard, but just that in terms of figuring it out, what to do, is kind of like they had a working culture where if you do the things that you've kind of been taught or trained to do, good results follow from that. And that is really broken for today. I mean, you know, and he, I guess in the article, talks about the culture, or politics being downstream from culture, and culture being downstream from technology. And I mean, that's an important part of it, you know, because there's this book from this 1970, you know, called Future Shock, which just the basic idea of it, he likens people, you know, over the course of your life, the cultural, technological, social changes that take place, to being like a traveler, you know, going to a foreign country that's completely different, you know. So it's like, if you're, you know, like the world of 1980, for example, is so different than the world today. It's almost like an alien culture in a way. So anyway, and now I'm trying to get back to where I was going with this, is, you know, trying to prepare kids for what the world is even going to be like. Nobody knows, like 10 years from now, is this Agenda 2030 of the WEF going to come to pass? Are we going to be living in pods? Or, you know what I mean? Like, there's, you just look at the way things are and you're like, okay, this can't go on indefinitely. You know, I don't know what the timeline is, but at some point it's like, this is just not sustainable. And, you know, if you're a young man today, you live in a culture where even the most basic aspects of our human nature are problematic to address or fulfill. And the information and analysis you're given about this is what things mean, this is what things are, this is how you be a good human, is so fucked. You know, there's no better way to put it. It's like, it's just not just wrong, but just completely opposite wrong, you know, of what a good, healthy culture would look like to cultivate virtues and strengths and things like that, that would enable a person to, you know, have a good marriage, have a good, you know, family, raising children, have a good, feel like a good, productive, in a meaningful way, part of the world around them. You know, it's like, what are you encouraged to do? You know, go to school, take on all this debt, get a bullshit degree, you know, work in a cubicle, like, you know, get married, where, you know, that's even a problem. Like the article addresses how you meet, and then when marriage is not held up as an ideal, when it's like, you know, you're supposed to be liberated from all bonds not consciously chosen. And it's like, you know, so you get married, but then you realize 5 years down the road, oh, we've grown apart, you know, I'm different now than I was when I got married. So I'm no longer obligated by these bonds, you know, so divorce is encouraged. Anyway, I'm turning it over to somebody else, but it's just like, I like that part, the way the article approaches us through the eyes of a young man, like you're getting this conflicting information from the culture. You're getting lectures from people that claim to have it figured out and are maybe judging you harshly without taking into account the reality that you're facing, the changes in the world, and the fact that it is an uphill battle, that you're assembling a workable understanding of the world and, you know, perspective and lifestyle on the fly, so to speak, in response to a dynamic, you know, rapidly changing situation culturally and economically, you know. And it's an uphill thing. But then on the left, it's like, what's the solutions? You know, cut your dick off and become a woman and wear lipstick. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not like nobody's really, or few people are offering a real solution. And so I guess that's the project that we're talking about, what the answer is, you know, providing that is going to be the challenge. Anyway, I've rambled long enough, so I'll turn it over to whoever's got.
Yeah, well, yeah, first of all, I mean, like, I think since Eric's not here, I'm going to try my best to play a bit of his devil's advocate, because I know there were some people that, you know, when they I guess contended with this article, because it is very long, obviously, it's sprawling, I guess you could say. And I think that because of that, and because of it's essentially, you know, Luke wrote the article a couple of days back, Absolute Progressivism. And I think to some degree, this octopus of absolute progressivism is something that he's trying to attend to all at once in this article, which is a very difficult thing to do. But on the other hand, I also don't think it could be properly described as an article. And I don't think that poem, even though that's closer, poetry, I don't think describes it very well either. It's hard in this format to describe. You have to actually see the article, but the article is filled with imagery. This is more properly a collage of some sort. It's not just words. If it was just words, it would fall completely flat. And if people, I think that people that are not necessarily visually oriented or acclimatized, like, I think that people that are more used to direct data, let's say sort of a left hemisphered apprehension of reality as a kind of an abstraction from which you could then summarize a list of points. I think this article won't work very well for most of those people that have those tendencies, because the visual components of this article are telling the entire story to some degree of this threat that is partially sexual, partially virtual. It's this, you know, again, it is this, we're tangoing with this sprawling abstract threat, this being that has so many different arms and so many different tentacles. And so it's sort of like when he talks about, you know, the de-industrialized world, or I think we could even say post-industrialized world to some degree, a virtual world. It doesn't really have bite unless you see the images. Like there are a succession, he calls it Pygmalion and the anime girl. And the article begins with lots of pictures of this anime girl, this cartoon. And they are, you know, repetitive to the point where, you know, the grotesqueness sort of falls away at a certain point, but then comes back. These girls that he selected are, you know, they have these gargantuan breasts, essentially, these grotesque, they're almost tumors. You know, it's like, it's not, if you saw that, if that person was to step out of that image, that would be a grotesque monster in many ways. And I know that, you know, people in our transhuman economy, essentially since the 80s or before, like ever since sort of like body modification and cosmetic surgery came into vogue, sometimes you would see people, women, that would actually try to reproduce this absurd effect, you know. And when you think about it, it's not, this might be controversial, but, you know, the shape of a woman is to some degree breeder down bottom and feeder up top. And almost all of these images, or all of these images, are really concentrated on the feeding portion of it, the mother, in other words. And I think that's why Billionaire Psycho associates this with some sort of grand quest for purity or innocence. I don't think that's necessarily, I think that's partially it. But then when you see this hyper focus on the kinds of pornography that I guess he's calling them incels or whatever, he's talking about essentially a generation of young men who have been excised from romance, that have been, like, you know, defeated in a multitude of ways by the transforming of the economy through technology and including social technologies. And so, like, now we have a situation where there are a bunch of young men who don't know how to romance, don't experience romance, and young women who have been sort of misled into thinking that happiness can be found outside of romantic love. And so, like, so in confronting this with images, which and those aren't the only images. I mean, he goes deep. He goes deep into, you know, he's got pretty women in here. He's got various formulations or inverted versions of various Greek myths. I mean, I know that he talked about Pygmalion itself as being like that, you know, we journeyed from that, the man trying to sculpt the perfect image of a woman, to the whore, you know, the opposite of Pygmalion, the living statue of purity. Then we have the whore who is now sculpting the man to purpose. And so it's strange. It's sprawling because he's trying to assail all of this at once. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. What's interesting, though, is that, to me at least, is that I think another big frustration with this, in addition to being sprawling and this multimedia form that isn't any one thing, is that the question, and we spoke about this briefly before we started recording, the question for a lot of us has become, okay, so what do we do? You know, what is to be done, right? We know that this is the reality that we inhabit. We know that, as he put it at one point, that it is it's dishonorable. It worships ugliness over beauty. He goes down through a litany of a list of things that it is. You know, it punishes competence. It punishes honor and dignity. It punishes truth. And it's like, okay, we know. You know, I think a lot of people are like, tackle something like this and they say, we get it. We know this already. Now what? And what's interesting is he does provide an answer towards the end. And I wanted to open this up to the group to talk about, because I think the answer is something along the lines of the answer that we're trying, or the puzzle that we're trying to solve right now, even as the Tonic 7, or even at Deimos, or even at Substack. And I think ultimately he wraps it all up in the word brotherhood, right? And with these images of brotherhood, but the images of brotherhood that he selects, I don't know if you recall, if you have the article up, there are unusual images of brotherhood. This is not Tolkien's fellowship. These are essentially masked predators in the woods. Do you know the series that I'm talking about? Like these images of these, of these essentially ninja warriors in the dark. And that is the type of brotherhood that he's talking about, sort of shadows in the night. People who can exist at some straight up and persist and plan and live well and be ready for what comes next seems to be his solution. And that solution is tied up in this concept of brotherhood and trust. But like the kind of brotherhood and trust that is undercover, that's, a midnight brotherhood, almost like not something that beats his chest and holds a parade or a political rally, but rather, again, like something that is deep and to some degree invisible to this world, to this world of absolute progressivism and all of its casualties and victims. So yeah, honor and brotherhood seems to be the solution, and it's not as exacting a solution as some people would want. I think some people want a plan. They see that as another form of reaction. I don't think it is a reaction. I think that what he's saying is we need to move past mere reaction. Not that we can't react, but that to react in the way that people currently are doing so, where they're opposing with like strongly worded letters and whatnot. He's like, well, that's kind of useless. Like what we need to do is we need to find each other in the darkness and bond together and prepare ourselves for this entire, shit show to come, this house of cards to implode. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is like exactly what we're trying to do, right? Which I think is maybe why this spoke to me so much. As he was going through a lot of the things that he was saying to do, it's like, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm working on, and regarding the brotherhood thing, I want to just point out what he said at the end for what you can do as an individual. Is like, hey, are you of a character and of a degree of competence that people are going to seek you out and want you to be a part of their group? And if not, get started. Make yourself into that person, because you're going to need other people. You're not going to be able to do this alone. This whole idea of deracinated individualism, like and I say this as like a longtime libertarian, we ain't going to survive like that. The people that have decided like, hey, I'm going to move out into the desert and I'll have my plot of land and a bunch of signs that say trespassers will be shot. Those people are all vulnerable. We need communities, but they need to be like, you can't just move to a town now and start a community. So it's like, how do you do it? And I think he's giving a roadmap for how you do it organically, given the complexity of the situation. So, you can't prescribe, like Luke said, trying to prescribe the particulars is folly. You're never going to be able to do that. It's never going to resonate and be accurate because things are just too complex. But what will always be helpful is making yourself strong, of high character, trustworthy, and honing your discernment in order to identify other people that are like that. And to be honest with you guys, I feel like that's what we've done here. That's how I feel about all of you. And, I feel honored to be a part of this group. And I have a high degree of trust with this group. Then again, I'm very good at trusting people and making, a deliberate decision to put trust into people, understanding that there's risk. There's always risk, but I think it's asymmetric risk. I think there's a saying, I don't know who said it, but it's better to, trust friend and be betrayed than not trust a true ally and friend. And I live by that. And I think that's a part of this. He didn't specifically say that in this piece, but he did say the thing about making yourself into that person of character, and then also about how, you know, the George R.R. Martin type of backstabbing, duplicitous shit weasel that runs Globo Homo at the highest level. You know, a group of individuals bound together by high levels of trust can cut through a bloated, rotted, you know, conglomeration of these individuals who really they're individuals that keep each other in check by blackmail, other means that aren't stable. They don't have the stability that true brotherhood and trust has, and they won't be able to compete. So those are my thoughts.
And I think also he was arguing that they're fundamentally unsexy. And like, this is where it gets weird, because towards the end, he's also talking about the type of, you know, I agree with you about trust, but like to some degree, our trust is public and in the daylight, you could say. But I think like he was going a stage deeper and saying like, no, you need to have the trust of Batman or a legion of Batman. You need to be those sexy outsiders. You need to be those, I think he said small, here, I got a quote here. It says small numbers of stubborn, small numbers of stubborn, focused, disciplined autodidacts become massively impactful when aggregated. Millions of ordinary men choose to sleep through a simulated pantomime of authentic life. So those are those potbelly goblins and their thralls in the virtual world, the NPCs, the addicts, the people that are caught outside of temporality because they're just reacting to all of the bells and whistles of technology. And then he says brotherhoods will form pulled by a gravitational magnetism. Women will be fascinated and enticed by such brotherhoods, confident, suave, muscular warriors contrasting against the broader population of effeminate, obese, submissive, over-socialized cattle. So I think like he does kind of round the edge there, and he completes the circle there at the end, because he begins by talking about the basic unsexiness of the world, right? And that's because, you know, you don't have men of danger. You have, you know, guys with man boobs like Bill Gates, like contriving, you know, new diseases so that they could sell people cures. Like these are, you know, this is not, these are not swaggering captains of industry, even in themselves. I mean, like, I think that, you know, when you try to conceive of like what even these people's sexuality is, it's like, well, you're talking about prostitutes and apparently child abuse in large numbers. These are not what typically a woman would, I don't think, find attractive. And so to some degree, he's talking about, you know, he's talking about outlaw rebels. He's talking about bad boys. And he's saying, in addition to our bonds of trust and brotherhood, we must become bad boys. And I think I kind of agree. You know, I think I kind of agree. Like when I see those images, it's sort of like, as weird as they are towards the end, I get it. You know, I get it when he says, it's like Sun Tzu when he says, let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night. And when you fall, or when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. Like that is what he's describing. He's saying we must become those type of outlaw rebel. I don't know if vigilante is the right word, but certainly an outsider, certainly someone who is completely seen as obscene by the current system. And I don't know what that means. I think it may mean a lot of different things for a lot of different brotherhoods. But I do understand his point that, like, you know, in other words, women will be more attracted to those who dare, to people who, to men who take risks, you know, and real risks. Yeah, that's what I think. He's talking about ninja warriors, and like I think that there's something in that makes sense to me, because again, it's sort of like, if we are to get out of this virtual trap and free ourselves back into the actual world, I think that that's what we find ourselves as.
You talk about I mean the ninja warrior aspect of it. There's one thing that's kind of tangentially related, but you know, a critical aspect of it. Okay, the regime is like psychopathic, psychotic. You know, people that want, you know, whatever they want you to do, it's almost safe to do the opposite. You know, be sort of well off. It just as a rule of thumb. You know, so anyway, there's an emphasis on like they want you weak, you know, and mentally ill and all that. So like focus on health and strength, physically, mentally, morally, all that. But then there's that whole, they want you isolated and you know, living in this virtual world and you know, the cultivation of like real life friendships. It's one of the things with the warrior aspect of military that's been strange on many levels. I mean, the obvious being the undermining the ability of, say, the United States to defend itself if, say, World War III does kick off. But the other thing is like, you know, that for the development of fraternity among, you know, platoon or squad or whatever, like of soldiers, or, you know, that where you have people that you train with and you know, especially go into a combat zone with, it's like that would develop and people would feel. I can remember this line, and this was like an interview I saw of the director of Restrepo, the movie, where I guess he was embedded with some soldiers in Afghanistan, and he was talking about how when they came back, you know, one of the reporters at the screening for this film asked one of the soldiers, you know, do you miss anything about, you know, your time in Afghanistan? And the guy thought about it for a minute and said, man, to be honest with you, I miss almost all of it, or something like that. And so the filmmaker was saying, well, when he said that, he wasn't saying like he missed fearing for his life or killing people or whatever, but it's like that fraternity of, to his right, to his left, he's got his buddies that he knows he can count on them, they can count on him, you know, an accountability, a tight bonds that are formed, you know. And then you come back home and I just, you know, you're just an anonymous civilian, and there's not, you know, outside of maybe like, you know, sheriffs or firefighters or something like that. I mean, there's not many professions where you have that type of fraternity, brotherhood, camaraderie, you know, whatever. And so anyway, when the powers that be have fucked up the military with all their woke bullshit, that's one of the things that it's like a devious angle of it, you know. That's a devious angle of it, where they've really, that was one place where young men could go to get that type of, you know, feeling like you're part of something and having camaraderie. And this, I wouldn't at this point recommend any young man to, I agree with Morgo Thorak, the undead, on Substack, where he said, don't enlist, don't die for this fucking globo homo regime, you know. But then too, it's like, okay, how do we, because that's, I think, the missing piece is like, how do we in real life form these type of networks, relationships with people? Because we live in a society where, you know, speaking for myself, I'm living in a place where I didn't grow up, you know, and I look at my neighbors and most of them are in the same boat. People move around a lot. You're in places where maybe you don't have these deep connections with the place where you live or the people that you live around. You have friends and family, but they're kind of spread out, you know. But that's obviously such a critical part of, you know, being healthy as a human being and thriving. So, you know, I guess I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, I agree with Grant. What we're doing here has been really meaningful to me, and, you know, look, and you guys have been great in, you know, providing this context for us to get together and discuss things and share ideas, you know, and thinking about how do we translate that into real life, you know. I mean, even if it comes to like real life events that we do, or just in our own personal lives, like the people that are around us, you know, that seems to be the real $1 million question. But I don't know, throwing that out there because I'm still working on ideas on my part.
Oh, we can hear you, Harrison.
Harrison, you're muted.
Harrison, you muted.
Or something's wrong with your audio?
Were you doing a Charlie
Uh,
Chaplin impersonation?
He does
He's doing
gestures.
his best
So-
Chico Marx impersonation.
So,
playing
so
charades.
maybe
let's-
does it work? Or maybe I just go ahead and you interrupt me once you're ready. All right. So I was just wanted to say about the ninja warrior kind of archetype, something, right? Because I think this is a kind of archetype, and it's important to remember that it's not necessarily, like about fighting wars and that sort of thing. I mean, although obviously it can be, but it's more like an idea, right? And sometimes you need to think of these things more in terms of something a higher level idea that can manifest in all kinds of ways in our individual lives, right? And part of say brotherhood forming and being a bad boy, right? A ninja in the night. It can also be something like, just putting yourself out there, and just or speaking your truth, or something that we're doing here, like getting together before like things get really tough, right? To risk something and conquer your fears, kind of thing, in different situations, and that's how you form a brotherhood. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, something like something like literally like becoming something like a soldier, right? So I think it's really crucial to not take things too literally sometimes, and that would be my advice as well, because for younger guys who might not have the kind of life experience that can put these things into perspective, right? That's again my point about like not having anybody like prescribe you something, whether it's the mainstream or whether it's some alternative guru. And Billionaire Psycho actually quotes Paul, who said something along the lines that, the weak is, that God works through the weak people and the oddballs, and the goofballs, kind of thing. And I think that's a powerful message that emerged from that and from the whole article, that part of like this hero's journey is like just be the goofball, do your thing, find out, what's your own destiny and your own thing without apologizing, right? And connected to that is something that I thought about, that might also be worth mentioning, and like the 68ers and the boomers and the hippies and that kind of people, they had this slogan that everything is political, right? And the private life is political, sex is political, and everything is political. And I think it's dangerous to fall into that kind of thinking, even as a reaction, right, to that. And I don't quite like this idea, that everything is political. It's a bit dangerous in the sense that, if you want to I don't know, like have a romance, or it's, don't do it to make a statement, right? A political statement. I mean, just do it for learning how to do it, and for growing your damn soul. That's where it's at. It's not a political statement, or the same goes like for, oh, we live in a feminized society, so I'm going to treat women like shit, because that's my revolution. That's kind of like falling into this trap, that these people that we're supposedly against have said, claiming that everything is political. And I'm not saying that it can't be a good motivation. You're just seeing how bad it is out there and just doing something different. I mean, that's obviously a good idea, but I just think, this kind of mindset can be hurtful, and we should actually figure out, what's our destiny, like how can we learn more, how can we grow, how can we become wiser, I mean, which only come through experience, through doing things, right? And through moving, basically. And I would just wanted to throw it out there, because I kind of read in that article a bit of that same point. He seems to kind of get it, to my mind, but also there are like moments where I'm not sure, like whether he, or at least like people who think like him, might have fallen into that trap, which can, kind of like have not so good consequences on your own personal life, or another way of putting it, would be something like, there's a difference between like the macro analysis of what's going on in society and the analysis from an individual perspective, what you should do. It's not the same. You can describe a society and describe the problems and where they have led us and all of that, and there's no straight straight logical connection between that and what you should do in your life, right? It's not so simple. And I think the whole article is a bit of a testament to that, just wanted to throw that out there.
I want to comment on that, because I agree 100%, but it's difficult to keep that delineated, because our enemies, to them, like you said, everything is political. And to them, they want to destroy our way of life. They want to destroy our ability to live our lives the way that we want to live them. And so if we use that framing, then us just trying to live our lives the way that we want to live them, by their definition, is a political act, right? So we just got to recognize that, like, we're not using their framing, so from their perspective, everything that we do is political because it's resisting what they're doing, which is political. But in reality, what separates us from them is that we're just trying to live our lives in accordance with our own values
and grow, and work towards something higher. That's, I guess, the difference, right? Between let's say working deliberately towards a political goal because you think everything is political, right? That would be like, oh, I don't want to get married, but I do get married because that's my statement, that's my political statement, that, which to my mind is complete nonsense, right? But if you say, okay, I'm striving towards something higher, and I have no idea, whether that will change the political system, or whether this will, create new institutions or subvert, like something or whatever. It's just, I'm doing my best, to get there and to grow and see that whole thing from a bit of a higher perspective. I think then that's fine, but it might be subtle. It's a subtle point, I guess.
It is, but I agree with you that it probably affects the way that you think and the degree to which you can derive fulfillment out of your life. If you start framing everything in terms of it's this political war, probably harder to get after that fulfillment.
I think also, it's just sort of like, just to bring it back to the subject of romance, because we talk about what is political, what isn't political, and again, I agree with everybody. It's sort of like when I attended art school a million years ago. I remember I got into a bar fight one time over this concept, the idea that all art is political, and of course I was the one lone voice that was shouting the opposite thing. I said, no art is political. Art that is political is called propaganda, and it was in the context of they were talking about Jesse Helms and the whole idea of wanting to eliminate NEA funding, the National Endowment for the Arts funding. And here I was, a young, the portrait of an artist is a young man who was bellowing in favor of Jesse Helms and against the NRA. I was agitating for it in a bar full of people that were extremely angry because they were all getting money from the NEA. And so here's the result. The result is I got laid that night. So here's the thing, because I was being sexy, okay? I wasn't being unmanly. I didn't start the fight. What I did was I said, as we're all saying right now, we're saying that, well, we're just going to stand up and live our lives and say what we value and say the truth as we observe it. And believe it or not, that's incredibly sexy to women. You know, there was a time in my life, I'm not bragging, it's a confession, but there was a time in my life when I was extremely sexually attractive to the opposite sex, to women. And I think part of that was negative. And the part that was negative was this. I was absolutely, in many cases, play acting the rebel. And this is to say that, in other words, even my wife, when she describes her first impressions of me, they were not good. She said, not that one. She said in the environment that we're in, she said, I was looking around at this whole field of men, and you stood out as the one that I said, not that one, right? That one looks a little bit antisocial. That one reminds me of Travis Bickle, is the way that she described me. And yet, you know, and I did not light her cigarette, and she remembers that to this day. She says she asked me for a light, and I handed her a cigarette lighter, and she remembers that too. And it was on purpose. In a strange way, I was being sexually attractive because I was being brusque, I was being rude, I was being an outsider of a certain sort that maybe was mysterious, but at the same time, you know, a lot of that was bullshit. So I think what he's saying to some degree towards the end of this article is don't be that. Don't be bullshit. Don't be a bullshit version of that. Don't use that as a hook necessarily. He's trying to reinvigorate romance as it was, as it should be.
And if you're not that guy, right? If you're not that, you know, like 19th century British gentleman kind of guy, you know, and you kind of try to simulate it. I mean, obviously women do pick up on that, right? I mean, it's like that's what I meant when I said, you know, like it's that these prescriptions or these, you know, like you should do this or that. It's tempting for young people because they don't have the experience, right? So they just need to follow advice to some degree, and that's fine, right? I mean, it gets you moving. But you know, at the end of the day, it's just such an individual thing, you know. Like one man can look like super sexy, super strong, you know, doing this, and the other man can look like super sexy, super strong, doing the complete opposite. You know, it's a good story, man.
But there is like I think that there's an opposite version of that where there's like the little guy that just goes around picking fights with everybody. And like, yeah, like at some level, there's going to be some, again, broken woman that's going to find that broken man attractive. And we see that all the time. And we usually see it in sociopaths. These are people with long criminal histories. These are people that I've known, like people that I just say like, okay, so you're all just about causing trouble for trouble's sake. And like this one is a vampire that feeds on that one's constant aggression and again sort of bullshit interaction, a bullshit rebel, somebody who's just sort of like who's just saying like, okay, I'm just going to cause a problem because like that's what I like to stir shit, and I think that makes me seem powerful. You know, it's like I didn't get into fights. I looked like I was dangerous enough to win them most of the time. I did get into fights, but like most of the time I just projected, you know, an aura of like, hey, don't fuck with me. That was enough. That's usually enough for women, strangely enough, or at least for young women. I think for, let's call them girls, because, you know, I think women are girls into their mid-20s and men are boys into their mid-30s at this point, in the way that they interact with the world. And just to pick up on what Luke was saying, like, I think it's even worse than the situation that they don't have the experiences. I think they almost have anti-experiences through media. I think that like me, you know, this chewed up, regurgitated form of experience, this phantom form that's almost like a dream, where people feel like they've experienced things that they know nothing about. They feel like they've lived a life, even though it was just sort of, you know, this was something that was pre-masticated and marketed to them on multiple levels since they were in the crib. You know, there's every generation alive today, including the boomers, has been essentially from the crib, had this mediated layer of experience that is virtual, that is not actual. And I think to some degree, the author is promoting this idea of get out there and be actual more than anything else. He's not saying necessarily that when you become ninja warrior knights of the round table or something. I think what he's saying is, he is saying that, but like, again, as Luke said, and as others have said, maybe not necessarily literally, but on some level, we are talking about secrecy, a secret brotherhood, if indeed the world is, as it seems to be heading, towards this kind of a panopticon prison. Like, we will all be outlaws in such a world, regardless of what we actually do. What we actually do day to day won't make a difference. We will be, Stalin's guilty man, like where it's sort of like where there is, they can come up with a crime. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is we don't want to play this social game as they've defined it. In that sense, yeah, like actual secrecy, actual danger at a point, regardless of whether we want it or not, will that I think that what he's saying is that will become the reality at some point. No matter what we do, we will be hunted at some point, and that we should probably make ourselves into the type of people that you don't want to fuck with, but that women, on the other hand, do.
That was very, very eloquent.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, the anecdote and that made me think that maybe another aspect to it, because I agree with everything that you said, Mark, and it's not something that occurred to me, but maybe the recommendation to establish these brotherhoods in secret is a way of recommending that people find space where they can practice being true to themselves and saying what they believe. For those that don't have the luxury of being able to do that in whatever sinecure that they're dependent upon, to feed themselves in the professional managerial class dominated world. So it's like, if you don't work a trade, if you have one of these professional managerial class jobs, you're essentially living on your knees. And if you're trying to be a real person, and I guess to use Mark's story, to be sexy in order to find someone and get married, but I think also more importantly, perhaps stay married. I think this might be a reason why some marriages fall apart. And I actually wrote about this in the context of the military COVID vaccine mandate when I wrote my appeal for religious accommodation. I outlined this anecdote of what would happen to me, if I, submitted to getting this vaccine that I didn't believe in. And in that story, it ends my marriage. And, I really did think through that. And, I think the ability for me to have a solid marriage and have the respect of my wife is I wouldn't be I wouldn't be me if I bent the knee to these fucking tyrants. I wouldn't be me, and she would recognize that. And maybe we could stay together, but for all intents and purposes, the spirit of my marriage would be strangled by that. And I can't be the only one. I think that that's probably very common. I think that a lot of times when women say, hey, I no longer find my husband attractive, so I'm going to get a divorce, maybe this is one of the dynamics that is causing that. The fact that they see their husbands constantly bending the knee, docile and submissive to a human resources department that makes them mouth how they're evil or inherently racist, or just going to work in a place where nobody respects you, respects what you bring to the team, and you just take it day in and day out. It's got to just have a pervasive impact on your overall demeanor, and just cause a spiritual sickness that probably is very unattractive.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know, that this idea of learning how to be someone who's not getting fucked with, you know, I think that a lot of it has to do with the mindset, right? And it's just something in the mind, basically. And I mean, for example, I freely admit I have always suffered from a lot of anxiety, right? It's just something that one of my particular mess ups, right? And just our days where, you know, where it's really hard, you know, it's just what it is. And I guess everybody has some sort of weakness like this, you know. If it's not like anxiety, it might be something else. And but we kind of need to grapple with this kind of neuroticism, right? It's just something that we need to work on, because otherwise you know, we'll be just weak, and we will just be, you know, run over by everything, and that's not good. And it's not necessarily something that there's a 5-step plan, you know, to fix or something like that, you know. It's like but I think the key is really working on your mindset, because that's where you change it, right? You can actually change it, and it's a deliberate thing that you can do. It just needs like years and years and years of work, and you better start today, you know. If it won't get easier if the world goes to shit even more, you know. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And then, you know, how that manifests, you know, whether you know, like, you stand up against the vaccine mandates, or it might be something completely different, or even small things, you know, in your daily life that can make you attractive to your wife, you know, and or attract a wife if you don't have one, right? It's just, and sometimes it's even small things, and not like the, you know, the big fight, whatever. But it starts in the mind, and I'm convinced of that, you know, because I have experienced it. And you need to learn. I think in one of my posts I kind of described it as I think I actually used the word like a mind ninja, you know, so tellingly. So I think that, so Billionaire Psycho used the same word, so it kind of fits. I think that's what you need to become, like kind of like a mind ninja, right? So if there's anxiety creeping up, you know, like, or some paranoia, or whatever it is, you just have to take out, you know, like your sword or whatever ninjas use, you know, I have no idea, and just, you know, cut that, you know, like oppressing energy, and that, you know, like blackness that tries to engulf you. Just cut it to pieces, you know, like, and just give it a roundhouse kick and whatever, and you know, do that sort of warfare in your mind, right? And then suddenly, you know, the light clears, you know, sun is coming out again, and you realize it's just bullshit in your head, you know. It's just kill it, you know. And yeah, so that's just the sort of thing I would recommend, you know.
Okay, can you guys hear me at all?
Oh yeah, we hear you.
Okay, good. So, well, I caught the last like 5 minutes, but there was a period there where I was just focusing on trying to get my microphone to work. So I want to backtrack just a little bit, and I think this is still relevant, of course, but this gets back to something that was mentioned in the beginning of the discussion about, well, I'll call it, well, there's a few ideas I want to put together. So first I'll go to the brotherhood idea and the kind of military brotherhood imagery. So I started like a month ago, I started reading this book, The Social Philosophers by Robert Nisbet. This is one that Michael McConkie recommended on Circulation of the Elites. And right at the beginning there, he talks about what he calls like two fundamental social structures, or like means of relating socially. The kinship structure and the military structure. And the thing about kinship, so kinship was basically like a clan-based society. It was your closest relatives, and there was a very kind of strict and unerring hierarchy and structure to it. So it's basically like if you were old, you were an elder. If you were young, you were a young person, and you had like there was a very specific place you fit in the structure. Now, so all the prestige went to like the chief and the elder people and the kind of the head of the family, and everyone else was subordinate to that. And so there was, in that sense, no individuality because the structure itself was like group based, family based, or like tribe or clan based. And then the military structure broke that up, and he talks about this in the context of the breakup of the kinship structure in ancient Greece. And the military structure totally broke that structure and it totally broke that kinship structure, and it created a structure that was totally independent of those kind of family ties. And so in this sense, it was individualistic because an individual could be a young guy that didn't hold any like place of importance in the kinship society, could now rise through the ranks of the military, and it was entirely determined based on basically your rank in the military. There's still a collective element of acting together, but as a group, as a cohesive group. But it was structured in a completely different manner. So so he emphasizes that this was, in a sense, compared to the kinship structure, an individualistic structure. Even though might not think about the military in terms of its individualism, but in terms of the guy that gets the glory, you can see it in that sense. So he has these two fundamental structures, and then everything else is kind of, well, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure he says that pretty much everything else is kind of like a variation on these structures. We have new social forms like religious and political, state, like in the sense of states, but fundamentally, like in the human condition, there are these two forms. So I find it interesting that there's this almost like pullback to a military structure, when the military structure, it's not as fundamental. Well, I guess you could say it's probably is. Maybe they're both pretty fundamental, but there's a part of me that thinks that going back to basics would mean kind of searching for a kinship structure, that sense of family and community, right? And that's what Grant was talking about really early on in this conversation is, how do we rebuild that? And it's not going to be like, some guy in the desert with a, no trespassing sign. How do you rebuild that, like a sense of that organic community? That isn't really, in a sense, that is antithetical to this military culture, this military structure. But so I'm wondering if there's a contradiction here or not, or if I'm wondering if the military structure as kind of like an alternative and a supplement to the kinship structure originally is functioning as this, is playing the same role now as an alternative to what isn't a kinship structure, but it's this weird, it's this weird something that's influenced by a whole bunch of other stuff. But Grant, you have a few comments on that, so jump in there.
So I don't think there's a contradiction, because I don't think that the military imagery has anything to do with the military structure. In fact, it's kind of quite the opposite. So the way that small unit cohesion works in practice is you identify less with the military hierarchy, the greater the extent of that cohesion at the small unit level. So like you might have a squad leader who's the leader of the group. And that's a small unit, 9 personnel, right? Or a fire team. It's got a buck sergeant, E5, and a couple privates and a specialist maybe. Those small units, if they're tight, they really stop thinking of rank, and they really actually stop identifying with higher headquarters. Mm-hmm. So like they're aware of the platoon level, the company's level, which is 2 echelons up, is very far away. It's not a concern. They don't identify with it. They don't care. They care about the people in their small unit. And there's actually been a lot of research that shows that in prolonged combat operations, that is the only thing that holds the unit together. The only thing.
Okay.
And so you don't actually, there's this misconception, and there's a misconception in the military too. You know, I've been looking into this a lot because of all the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff. The fact that there's been an explosion in suicides, and it's like, how do we solve this problem? I think the two are related, frankly. So I've, you know, been kind of doing a deep dive on literature and found a really great paper about small unit cohesion. And you know, there's research on it where they've looked and established that that's the case. And it gets to the point where somebody could be in a hospital and they break out of the hospital to go join their unit again, but it's just to get back with their brothers that they're accountable to. They don't care about the war effort. They don't care about patriotism. None of that shit means anything at that point. It's just the people to their left and right that they have that bond with. And at that point, once you have that level of cohesion, yeah, somebody's the leader, but they're not thinking in terms of rank. It's a brotherhood, and it's I think more along those lines of kin at that point.
Well, those are all really good points. I think that made me think that I think that Nisbet's point was that in that military unit, the guys aren't related, right? It's not a family structure. It's kind of it's a different type of bond. Whereas, so he's talking about it in this sociological historical context where, you know, prior to a certain point, there was no military structure in that sense, that everything was tribal based. You were closely related to everyone that you were interacting with, like even in a hunting situation. Military structure is while it has that cohesion on like the small group level, you're forming a bond with people that you wouldn't have previously in a smaller community based, like tribal or clan based setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this doesn't even actually happen very much, like this degree of cohesion. And really now, I don't think it exists almost at all anywhere in the military, especially.
I think that you could even actually say that it is a metaphysical bond, or even a holy bond, if you're willing to go that far. Because what we are talking about is something that transcends tribe, that transcends physicality. And even as Grant is saying, transcends strategy, transcends allegiance, transcends chain of command. And in that sense, I think we could say unit. When we say unit, we don't necessarily need to go military. There are lots of units in society and in the world and in just human thriving. And so it's just sort of like smaller units. Let's see, smaller units that are more cohesive are also more flexible. The communication layer is also more adaptive and responsive and agile. Like in some ways we're talking about Dunbar's number. In some ways we're talking about a fractal version of what we see in global hegemony and in these globalist elites like that, where they're saying like, no. The best, most efficient system is centralized command from a great distance. And we know that that's the opposite of reality. We know that small, cohesive units are the ones that get things done. These are the primary actors on the material plane. It is not some bureaucrat sitting in a desk in Zurich. It's not, it can't be that. They could do tremendous damage in that model. And have historically. Harrison's like cataloged quite a bit of this, through Lobachevsky and through other explorations. But we all know this. We all know that what is distant and cold and centralized and at the same time diffuse and weak at every end will result in disaster. And so maybe like when we're talking about these bands of brothers, these fellowships, whatever they are, like that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about size and like agility, and I think that so it transcends just the military paradigm. Like we're not just talking about the military. We're talking about any group of actors that are cohering towards a certain shared goal. which could be a business, which could be a church, which could be any number of things. You know, it's like I wrote that. I don't know if anybody read my piece where I was talking about the possibility of sanity clubs. I don't know. I have yet to develop that, but something like that, like something where it doesn't, you know, we now can, even though it's virtual, and even though I think that has problems, like we now can form clubs across great distances, and not just of space and time, but of experience, of spheres of influence, of skills. You know, it's a very unusual time, and like I think if I have any big criticism of Billionaire Psycho's article, it's that I think in the rush to criticize the technology, because as he orders it, he says, well, that is in a priority position to all of these other troubles. I do think that we need to, and are learning how to turn what could be a very destructive technology to our advantage. And I think we should be doing more and more of that. And the one criticism that I think towards the end is that, you know, there was, through this imagery and through this general idea that I agree with, that like romance is to be found in the physical world, the physical interactions, the risks that are involved in that. At the same time, you know, if I'm going to be a ninja warrior knight, like bounding around in the darkness in the wilderness with my brothers, and all the women that are chasing after us, I'd rather be a techno ninja knight. I'd rather use the tools that I have to their greatest advantage, while understanding their weaknesses and dangers. And I think that as a ramble or a polemic or whatever you want to call this, like I think at the end I sort of got a little bit of a taste of Luddite spice there at the end, where it was just sort of like, yes, we need to reject the sort of the overwhelming damage that technology does, but at the same time, we're all communicating through this technology. We're swimming in it, you know what I mean? And it's just sort of like, as much as we have to, we want to get back into the physical, we have to realize that this will be a component of that as well.
Actually didn't get that. I didn't get that it was a rejection. It was more of exactly what you say, that we just have to learn how to use it differently.
Right. Not a rejection. Not a rejection. Yeah, you're right. Not a rejection, but it's
do about it. In fact, he said like, "Hey, it's here. Like, there's no going back." So I think his point was actually exactly the same point that you're making. There's just not, you know, the imagery suggests, you know, a certain physicality.
Right. That's what I meant. The imagery, Grant. You're right. This is what I exactly meant, is that, yes, he was saying that. And at the same time, the images that we are shown suggests something else. And that's why I think it's like, it's more of a collage than like a traditional piece.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, just want to say that I think there are a few points in the article where he kind of contradicts himself. You know, you could read it that way, which I actually liked, to be honest. You know, because it kind of makes you think, and also these things are contradictory. You know, sometimes, and with the, you know, physical thing, I think what he was getting at, and I mean spot on. You know, it's like with the whole dating thing. There's just nothing, you know, that replaces like being with people, you know, and just learning that. And there are so many people today, young people who just, I mean, they're barely able to go to the supermarket, you know, because they just don't have the social ability, you know, and it's just crazy. But I think that it's a good point, you know, to say that, I mean, you got to learn the basics, you know, and just interact with people in the flesh, you know, and not just on the screens. And at the same time, you know, I think, and I think was his point as well, that we need, you know, we cannot cannot use the same answers, you know, that were valid in the 1950s or 60s or whenever, you know. It's just, it doesn't work. it's not the same question even, right? So there's no choice but to figure these things out in the context that we live in, right? And just as an example, you can reject, like the whole Tinder thing, but do you reject like WhatsApp, or how do you deal with with messages, and that's where a lot of dating happens as well. I mean, that's just a spectacular change, that it's hard to overestimate what that did, just text messages, it's not as crazy as something like Tinder, but texting is just so incredibly different and can lead to so different outcomes, whatever, and it has its own traps. And how do you deal with that? I mean, you obviously can't say, okay, I'm going to be a hermit, and then just call me on my landline, kind of thing. But even though that might be a good idea, to be honest, but you kind of have to play the game a little bit, and to a certain degree. And I think that's kind of like the tension that we're all dealing with, right? We have this devilish system which has enslaved us, and we should admit it. Even everybody is enslaved by it in a way. But we need to figure out, how to use it, how to deal with it, and there's just no straight answer to that question, and that's the thing. And if any article, or author who claims to have a straight answer, just doesn't cut it. And I think that's what Billionaire Psycho really was upset with, and the whole article was kind of a response. I read it that way, to these people who come with ready answers.
Did you guys read Librarian of Serrano? I'm mispronouncing it. The Librarian of Serrano's Substack, the article about he did about coyotes, or the eastern coyote, where a reason I think it addresses what you were saying, Luke. You're talking about kids today. Some are so dysfunctional they can't even go to the supermarket. There's this dogs, or domesticated dogs, for lack of, I mean, they're great. I have two, but they're kind of retarded wolves, where like wolves are just a lot smarter and but wolves are also not so agreeable. If you try to get them to fetch or whatever, they're gonna say, fuck you, I'm getting out of here. You know what I mean? Like, and so he proposed this coyote as this kind of middle ground, where the coyote's been very versatile, like living in the wild, but also living among human beings, and even mating with wolves and dogs, to domesticated dogs, to create this kind of weird hybrid animal. But you have, I guess on the one hand, society's turning us into these domesticated dogs, where just like the kids that are so dysfunctional they can't even go to the supermarket, you have some dogs that, if you put them in the wild, I mean, they look cute, but if you put them in a state of nature, they're not going to last 2 seconds, but then you have the wolves on the other extreme that are, these brilliant apex predators. They work well together in this wild setting, but they're just not able to coexist with human society, human civilization. And it's like, but then the coyote has done so well because it's versatile, it's adaptable, and it kind of presents that. But anyway, it's a great article. The title is "The Coyotes Are Not What They Seem" on Hybrid Vigor by Librarian of Solano, whose name I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, but it speaks to that. And it just kind of like, it's not a concrete, here's a practical step on how to be a coyote, but just maybe a different way of a useful, paradigm shift, to use the manager buzzwords. That was good. But anyway, sorry, I think maybe I was cutting off. Harrison, you were about to say something.
Oh, well, I was just going to bring up a part that I think we just kind of briefly alluded to, and that's his short discussion on the idea of meritocracy. And I thought his presentation of it was just really good. I'm just going to read a couple sentences from it. So he says, the basic premise of meritocracy is that anyone can succeed. Anyone can get rich if they are willing to sacrifice, study, chase risks, and invest many years into grueling effort. Anyone can be a winner. You get what you deserve. So we talked about how this kind of form of ambition, you see it in the idea of the striver, the social striver, who essentially just like a social chameleon, or sociopath, as he puts it. But then he writes, The beautiful theory of meritocracy, government by the best, brightest, when applied, has been sociopathic. The flip side of this aspirational logic is obvious in hindsight. If anyone can be a winner, hard work is always rewarded, and you always get what you deserve, then losers deserve to lose. Suffering is earned. Poverty is justice. Failure is a kind of karmic retribution, perhaps for laziness or a cowardly aversion to risk-taking. So I thought that just by phrasing in this way, it's yeah.
Well, that is sort of how they're framing meritocracy, except it just means for certain groups. So like the way that they do it now is they say like, no, you deserve what your current state of degradation, you deserve it because you are this or you are descended from that. Whereas this other group or this other person, well, that's just a result of structural or whatever. Like that's not your fault at all. So like there's a meta meritocracy going on beyond all of this that is completely hypocritical, illogical, immoral, insane. And like that's what drives a lot of people, up a wall, where it's just sort of like, you don't really mean what you say you mean when you say meritocracy, and oftentimes it cuts in both directions, but usually it's in one direction where it's just sort of like, you will be blamed if we want to blame you. You will be guilty if we want you to be guilty, if it's required. And then it just becomes a game of scapegoating. And I think he understands that. We all get that. Like that's part of the frustrating part of this piece. It's like, yeah, we know. You know what I mean? But you've put it very well, and you've put it in this, like you said, you've put it in. This is a long article contained of many short bursts of insight that are very concise, and I think like that's one of them, right? Is like the lie of meritocracy or the deception of it. Yeah.
Well, but just one sec, Grant. So the thing about that, like he describes the theory of meritocracy as government by the best, brightest, and kindness. Well, that's just a description of aristocracy. Like that's what aristocracy meant, is the government by the best. I think that the thing about meritocracy, it's this idea of he talks about it just a bit further on. I think it's this winner take all mentality that it provokes, or it promotes this intense competition to then enter the meritocracy, and everyone else gets left behind and screwed over. So there's something fundamentally like pathological about that system, because in what maybe you could call it like a competocracy, where everyone just gets sorted to their level of competence. Like a person like, well, he gives the screenshot of the 4chan post about the guy that's working at the position, like he's working at the same position as the older guys are in his whatever profession he's in, whatever job. They all own houses. He's paying $1,800 in rent for a small apartment. And the guys are like, well, that's crazy. I was able to buy my house at this position, at this job, in this position, which is what you're at, in my 20s. And now I'm living in this house, and, it's quadrupled in value, and, et cetera. And my mortgage payment is a fraction of what you're paying in rent. And so when that situation obtains, you have this is the wealth pump that Turchin describes. You have a whole bunch of people who have not enough. And then you've got the meritocrats who allegedly merit being there, who have way more, who have like kind of everything. You have this extreme inequality. Whereas in a true competocracy, a true social system, not just a government, not just ruled by the competent, but in a sane social structure, a person who is only competent at a certain level. Like it could be the other guy, the other screenshot of the guy working at the gas station. Like a person with a job like that should be able to support themselves and a family, right? And that's the way it used to be, right?
Yes and no. I mean, like maybe though, weren't those people time bandits though? Like if we want to give a full accounting of the boomers, I'm talking time banditry. I'm saying they stole from the future. or they borrowed from the future. I should say, like they borrowed significant amounts of money and capital and value that didn't fucking exist. And so when we're talking about Generation X and Generation Y and Generation Z and Z+1 or whatever, if anything comes after it, we're talking about an impoverished series of generations that were impoverished through loan outs of essentially imaginary capital. So they're living in these houses and they're gaining this equity from these so-called investments that were based on essentially lies and future transfer payments and other transactions that were speculative at best, and were just kind of outright lies at worst. It's just like in other words, I'm saying I agree with you that that's the situation, and he put it very well. He said well, I can't afford any of this. My point is, I don't think they could either. Everything post-war in the post-war economy, I think, became rapidly mutated. And certainly with the rise of the petrodollar, certainly with the death of Bretton Woods, certainly we saw these wild mutations of value itself, where people were just really borrowing against a future that, again, that they themselves were purposefully, misunderstanding and misimagining in their favor. So it's sort of so do those houses that those people live in, do they actually have the value that's attached to them? That's a question that I have all the time.
You say it's the whole financial sector turned into a giant pyramid scheme. Whenever 1913 or whatever, and it's each generation gets in later in this pyramid scheme, and so by the
but
you're early adopter to the pyramid scheme, you can actually do well, but later on it's the returns are just get worse and worse and worse.
I think it's an excellent point, actually. What I really have never thought about it like that, that what you guys just described, because the meritocracy idea, it sounds kind of straightforward, right, in the abstract. Okay, you work hard, you get more, that's fair, or you're just doing something more productive, so it sounds easy on paper, right? But actually, you would have to compare, over long stretches of time, right? You can't just compare me, to the next guy, this hour, but you would have to, if I'm working as hard as someone else 10 years ago, and I know in 10 years I won't be nearly close, but to this other guy, and then he might have worked the same, or be equally productive, then it falls apart, the whole idea, because then where's the meritocracy here? Because we have done the same, right? And yet there's a vast gulf and so you would really have to take into account a long time span and all those bubbles and inflations and what have you, so and I think I've written this article, The Truth in Wokeism, and it wasn't specifically about that, but how wokeism and all sorts of ideologies like that, how they gain a foothold is always, via a certain truth, right? So otherwise just nobody would ever care ever, and it just wouldn't get a foothold or foot in the door. And so in this case, I think we kind of instinctively recognize that meritocracy, it sounds like a good ideal, but it's just not how life works exactly, right? We all kind of know that, it's there are just people working their ass off, just they don't get anywhere, and there's people just inherit everything and just live the good life, and all that kind of stuff, or just get lucky, or it's just life is complex, and I would say actually there's an element of destiny in it and fate, that it's not you cannot easily plot, on a graph, but that's just makes it even more complicated. But and that's, I think, the kernel of truth in some of these woke attacks on the idea of meritocracy, and there is, it just sounds too good to be true, and that's an important aspect, I think, that you guys have like described. And I mean, I'm just a bit behind the curve, but I've never really thought about it, like that actually, if there's an economic decline, this whole idea doesn't work. How can you even compare, what one guy does, with the other?
Yeah, the thing that jumped out to me about it is the blaming of people for failure, because it goes right into this common thing where there's this left-right split. And this is the common dialectic, right? Where people that are rich, it's like, hey, I'm rich because I earned it. And the people that are poor, they deserve it. And then on the left, the other side, it's the poor people are like, well, all the rich people stole it. Okay, that's why they're rich, is because they stole it. And that lacks the nuance of the reality. So like the reality is like much more complicated, but it's a combination of both. Because some of the rich people absolutely did steal it, and some of the people that aren't successful, it's sometimes it's because they're lazy or crazy. Maybe society failed them, whatever. But this is why I really like focusing on, like free market type stuff when it comes to this, because it's amoral. There's no good or bad. Like, people don't deserve to be rich or poor based on their competencies, because a lot of that's genetic, right? A lot of it's circumstance. There's not equal opportunity. Some people have more opportunity than others. It's not what you deserve because of your competence or your ability or how hard you work that matters. That can't ever be morally just to have it be based on that. The only thing that could be based on is how productive are you, and getting to enjoy the fruits of your productivity. That's the only morally consistent middle ground between these two positions, where both sides, there's a grain of truth. If you're really competent and you produce a lot, and other people get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, and you do too, cool. If you're really not competent and not capable and you can't produce much, I mean, pretty much the thing is given nature and how everybody's varied, and we all have different abilities and capabilities and levels of skill and different opportunities, even people in America, the idea of the American dream was not that anybody could be a rock star. It was that you could take your innate ability and position, and you could work hard, and you could get a return on that.
You could work hard, play hard, is what you're saying.
Well, you could make
work hard, play hard.
Yeah, not that you would be wealthy, but that even if you weren't the most intellectually gifted, you didn't weren't going to be inheriting any money, and in fact maybe inheriting debts.
But isn't the American dream, forgive me for my European ignorance, but isn't the American dream more something like you can actually move to the very top of society?
Not according
hard?
to the guy who coined the term.
That's interesting.
So the guy who wrote the book on it, that coined the term, he very explicitly acknowledged that people have different innate abilities, and they're going to get to different places. So yeah, that idea is it's a straw man of the American dream. The idea that anybody can make, because it's like obviously not true at all. And
the American dream is just like not class. There's no class ceilings. I think it's something like that, right? Like there's not an artificial boundary. It's the like boundary is like what you're willing to input.
So you can be like an aristocrat basically by being competent, productive, whatever. You can become an aristocrat, quote unquote, in the American way. I think that's as opposed to like traditional European aristocratic system where you can get like a hugely rich industrialist, but there's still a ceiling, where you, unless some
I think
nobleman needs some money and marries their daughter to you, but
right. I think like actually you're hitting on like the key difference there, because like there's a contradiction in meritocracy, right, as opposed to aristocracy. So the contradiction with meritocracy is like something along the lines of, oh, well, if you put in a lot of hard work and effort and stuff, then you will not have to put in a lot of effort and hard work and stuff. You can relax. In other words, the more you put in hard work and effort, the more you can relax. There's a contradiction there, because what they're really talking about is generating wealth. And like once upon a time, the idea was, well, it's not just for me. I am generating wealth for my name, for my family, for my clan, for everything that goes forward into this future that I won't experience, that I won't inhabit in any physical way. So it's sort of like, so once upon a time, wealth was considered generational wealth. The idea of me putting in a huge amount of work, which I can enjoy the fruits of my labors because I'm too busy working. Right. But like there was a point where they said like, yes, but I may be busy working, but my children or their children or their children's children will at some point be able to just relax. And then we get into the philosophical territory of like, what the fuck is wealth for anyway? I would say that like my first, like, just to bring it back into the realm of romance, for example, I was thinking about the first time that I got a girl naked in the room with me, right? And I can remember everything about that experience. It was the most exciting fucking thing ever, right? It was just sort of like this idea, and then we're touching each other, and then we're embracing each other, and we're breaking all the rules. Like this is a night, music's blasting, everything is perfect, and I'm like, how much money would I trade for that night? What's that night worth? What is that experience worth? What is wealth for? If it's sort of like, and then you see these wealthy pseudo aristocrats and technocrats that are chasing after weird dreams of immortality and all kinds of other nonsense and bullshit. And I'm just sort of like, I think to myself, it's like there is a contradiction in the heart of meritocracy, in the sense that like, merit for what? Merit in service of whom? Like, it's sort of like past the experiences like the one I just mentioned. It's sort of like, okay, so you had that and you wouldn't trade it for the world, but you might trade it for something. You might trade it for something that was worthwhile. You might trade it for something that was good and something that transcended the mundane, everyday toil of life. And that's where we get into the realm of the philosophical and the metaphysical. That's where we transcend all of the nonsense of like, I'm working hard all week so I could play hard all weekend, which is, not necessarily a nihilistic sentiment, existentialist maybe, but like not something that's particularly interesting when you drill down into it. Not something that seems aligned with life and like the idea of a life that is meaningful and purposeful. And so like when people argue against things like capitalism or meritocracy, I think like really what they're really saying is, damn, I'm in this void. I'm in this darkness. I can't see any reason or purpose or meaning to anything that I do. And like and so rather than assault that, they assault these straw men of, oh, it must be this system. It must be the system. It must be capitalism. It must be meritocracy. It must be the education system or the prison industry or something like that. They push it out to the political. They push it out just like a bear in the woods is a hairy fang monster until somebody calls it a bear, and then it makes it less. Somehow it's supposed to make it less scary. You can identify it and you can put it in its box, and that's what politics is now. Politics is like trying to like get these scary monsters and name them and put them in little boxes. But that meaning, that death of meaning, that absence, I think that's what this article is mostly trying to describe, this vast, dark void of meaninglessness, and romance as a way out of that. And I agree with that.
Yeah, I do too, but I feel autistically compelled to address the contradiction, because I think it's pretty straightforward. You work hard up front because you can generate capital doing that. Capital increases the efficiency of your labor, so then you don't have to work as hard. Like that's the idea in a free world, and that only works as long as everybody is engaging economically, cooperatively. As soon as coercion enters into the equation, that's a way of cheating that system. And that's really ultimately the simplistic, simplistic understanding of all of this stuff is when people are mad looking for a villain, they name capitalism or they name this or that, and they don't understand that really the villain is always coercion. Always. Because if everybody could just cooperate and nobody tried to cheat, then that's simply how it would work. People that were more competent and more capable, that worked harder, would be able to generate more capital. That would increase efficiency of labor, so then they wouldn't have to work as hard. Wealth accumulates, and some people aren't as competent. They're not able to do that as much, or even maybe accrue enough to make a meaningful difference in how hard they have to work and live paycheck to paycheck. But it's, the constraints are imposed by nature, because nature doesn't make life just easy to live. Like, you have to feed yourself, you have to clothe yourself, you have to protect yourself against the elements. And all of this requires capital and labor. Like existing isn't free. And that underlying reality is kind of what we're all fighting against. And if we all agreed to do so purely cooperatively, I think humanity would be very prosperous, very sustainably. But we can't all agree to do that. I mean, we do vocally, but behind the scenes, that's what politics is to me, essentially, is disguising coercion, disguising outright theft, usury, just cheating. And we, in spite of all of that, what I got out of the article is, the system was more probably balanced towards cooperation than coercion, enough so that a lot of wealth was created and a lot of prosperity. But the parasites have overwhelmed the host, and the structure of the host, is dependent upon these degrees of competence that come from social technologies that no longer exist. And so now it's just not going to be able to sustain, because just as we optimized for efficiency with this, quote unquote meritocracy, the psychopaths and sociopaths and strivers have optimized for using political systems and other large institutions to disguise coercion as compassion, writ large. So I didn't really want to go all into that, but I felt compelled to defend the honor of capitalism's name.
I am not a attacking capitalism, nor am I attacking meritocracy. As you say, what I'm attacking is that these things exist in this laboratory format that people pretend they do, because that's not what we live in. They could wear any kind of mask or drag outfit that it wants to. We do not live in a capitalist system, nor do we live in a meritocracy. We live in a funhouse mirror of those things that are, and the imagery is controlled by criminals, essentially. So we're not in disagreement, actually. I just wanted to go on the record and say I'm not a communist. I'm saying that these are used as sort of rhetorical tools to actually produce the opposite results in many cases. Like, in other words, I could say meritocracy out of one side of my mouth, and then what I really mean is some kind of a class system that I already have gained ahead of time, which that's clown world. That's what we live in.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think really there's a thing called agorism, which I don't know if you guys have heard of. It's big in libertarianism, but it's the idea, like in French System D. That's kind of, he alludes to that in the article, which is the solution, right? So it's like we have this system that's been infested and totally dominated by by people that are wielding coercion in this manner. The system, to use the Turchin reference, is turned into a wealth pump, and so that system's going to fail. And so a part of the we've talked about how forming networks and brotherhoods, that's like the ultimate recommendation, but what's that tied to? That's tied to a parallel economy. And the idea of System D or agorism is, the cooperative aspect of the market where real things are being produced in the absence of coercion, in the shadows, and then eventually protected by independent security services, grows to the point that it's larger than the captured and parasitized economy.
We should make trust a currency, actually, which it is, but it can only work among brotherhoods, because otherwise you can have that currency, right? So I think that
and in secrecy and darkness, I would say too. Like Nostra, we should be developing along the lines now of blockchain, of crypto, of Nostra, in order to make this possible. Because without that cloak of darkness, we're just sitting ducks.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where it all kind of converges to. It's just exactly how that goes down. And, it's going to be complex, but I think that Billionaire Psycho did a good job of outlining key fundamentals to focus on that will be useful no matter how this all plays out.
Yeah, quantum encryption is the ultimate magic. Like once we get there, we do eclipse this current. This is a stutter step between various stages of development, is the way that I've come to see it. So what we're on the verge of is that next level of magic where all of these toys and tools that the coercive tyrannical rulers now seem to be in control of can invert in a heartbeat. And once that happens, I think this is what the author is telling us. He's saying, be ready for it. Be the type of people that are ready to populate that new world, to rush into that zone. Once it opens up, once that portal opens up, right? We need to be those muscular, sexy, dark ninja warriors that just flood into the gates and say, okay, we're ready for the next level. We're ready for the next iteration, the next level of being, almost. And I think it is no less than that. We really are poised to make a leap to something that's very, very different. And that could be very, very bad, or it could be extremely amazing in a way that we maybe could have dreamt when we were kids, but probably not.
Yeah, absolutely. So to close this out, Daniel had a comment about how, does capitalism necessarily progress to this crony capitalism and this current system that we have? And I would again tie the answer to that question back to the central point of this article, which is it's really the social technology that prevents that progression. It's the strong communities and marriages, relationships, interconnected communities of trust that prevent the progression of that kind of thing. It prevents the progression of strivers from taking over. In an economy where everybody's decentralized and they're individuals and they can move from place to place and you can change jobs every year or two, that heavily favors the smooth sociopath that can present as competent and likable with a well-practiced image, and then gain that trust, infest the organization, do untold damage that's obvious to everyone below the psychopath, and hidden from the people that they're schmoozing and pleasing above the psychopath, and then they move on before anyone can put the pieces together. And that doesn't work in a small community. That person's credibility is toast after they try that one time. And so everything that Mark said, 100%, but I think that like the subtext is, what do we do to keep it from happening again? And I think it's that forming strong, interconnected communities and trying to get back there. However we do it, it's going to be complicated using modern technology and adapting to the way it is. But if we can figure out how to thread that needle, then not only can we build up and get through this, maybe not in our lifetimes, maybe in the lifetimes of our children or our children's children, but focusing on that community aspect to keep this from inevitably progressing back to the exact current situation that I think we all agree is not sustainable. So with that, thank you all for joining us for another Tonic discussion. By all means, if you listened to this before you read the article, go read Billionaire Psycho's article and share in the comments. What'd you think? We'd love to hear about it and interact there, or of course on Demos Station. Thank you all for joining us.